Good afternoon, guys, or good morning, or good evening. I think almost all of us know what UI animation is. UI obviously is user interface, the design of the interfaces of web and mobile products that users interact with. And animation is a general term. Everybody knows what animation is. It's more like adding life to something. So UI animation is adding life to user interface. People call it UI motion. People call it interaction. People call it different so. It's all centered around animating the transitions, animating the micro interactions, animating the elements of a user interface. Now, the benefits of UI animation, because I know developers, especially the front end guys, have been on our necks as designers that, hey guys, we've been trying our best to actually implement your UIs as it is. Now you're adding to the workload by adding animation. How come on? You really need this? You hear all sorts from developers saying that you really don't need UI animation. You see people for our colleagues from the marketing and sales will be like, you know what, UI animation is more like at the end when we have bandwidth or when we have more time, we actually can do it. But apparently UI animation should be something that should be taken into full consideration, even from the beginning of the product, because there are a lot of benefits inside your animation. Number one, I feel it helps communicate your ideas to developers and to the stakeholders. There is a way or there is an image, there is a dream you have as a product designer that you want to use to solve a particular solution with your product. Sometimes there are chances that you may not be able to fully elucidate that flow. With stills, you might need to actually do some UI animation, some UI interaction to fully explain the flow. So having the ability to do this gives the developers and the stakeholders a full understanding of how the flow is. The developers will be like, oh, really? This is actually how it's supposed to go. The stakeholders can be like, aha, this is how the messaging flow is going to be. So it's very, 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 very easy to communicate your ideas as designers to developers straight up off the bat. Another very key importance of UI animation is that on the personal level, it helps your work to stand out. If a hiring manager or recruiter or so anybody is going through your portfolio and they see tokens of UI animation or interaction in your work, number one, it gives it, an exciting feel. And number two, it shows that you understand the flow of a product. Chances you have enough understanding to take a product from end to end. It gives the person viewing your profile or your portfolio, it gives them a feel that you actually know what you're doing. Although UI animation is not the only criterion to prove that you're actually quite good at what you're doing. Neither is a hard requirement. But when you have an huge number of portfolio that you're going through at a glance, once they actually have animation, chances that they're actually going to spend more time on them than the normal, long form portfolio. And also on agency level, it also gives the impression to clients that you actually quite, have the bandwidth and also the necessary talent to actually handle a project. Chances are when it comes to agency level, especially when you're working with large government parastatals, you actually have to do presentations for a particular flow or a presentation for a particular design. So when you actually animate and actually add interactions to it, it gives you sort of like an edge above other guys that are actually submitting their proposals. Me personally, as a designer, one of the things that has given me a bit of a leverage in my career is the ability to actually animate, the ability to actually make my work look more nicer with animation or over other. Because when people come to my portfolio, one of the things that interests them is the animation and how everything looks more exciting. So it really helps your work stand out. And another thing is that it delights users. If you choose the apps you love going back to your most favorable apps, you will agree with me that there are instances of these animations that actually you see, the micro interactions. A key example are the Apple product. Apple really invests a lot in their animations, in their interactions. You could see the way the transitions of the screens are, it's not just abrupt, it's not just linear, there is the flow, there is an ease in, there is an ease out. It is sweet. These little things you might not notice. You might not really know why you love a particular app, but these little interactions and motions are what delights users and creates, an immersive and exciting experience for everyone that actually goes through your app. And lastly, I feel UI animation helps push design forward. We've been designing for a long number of years right now. Chances are designs are actually looking the same way. It's becoming, template. It's becoming templatized and it's looking sort of the same way. And I understand that we should have best practices, but we only have best practices to solve a solution as much as the required knowledge we actually have. The more knowledge we have, the more best practice we actually make. So I feel one of the concepts in design that push the frontiers of UI design is UI animation. Because when you animate, you have much more arsenal to do more with your designs. You actually have more ideas to think, to see, to be creative enough. So moving on, see my example. So the three core types of motion in UI, I actually categorize them to three. Number one, functional motion. Functional motion thinks about improving the usability and the user experience of a product. Think about drag and drop. Think about animated over and click state. For example, in this particular, I created these decks with Figma. When you over, you see this interaction that shows up to you. And when you click, you get something like this. Oh, it's quite slow, yeah, because I'm actually presenting. It shouldn't be this slow though. I never knew it was actually going to be this slow because of presentation. But functional motion aims to make the whole experience for the user much more nicer. In a situation like this, when I press send, say it is a messaging app, I don't need to leave the screen. I don't need to see an extra pop-up come up. I see straight up from just a single CTA. This helps create a more enticing or much more functional UI for the user is actually going through your app. Instead of me clicking send and I see a pop-up and I have to go to another screen, you're actually going through a lot of stage, a lot of steps, which is really not so nice. But from here, you can actually increase the functionality of your app with motion. Another is structural motion. Google Material Design really does justice to it, whereby they actually explain how you can create nice transitions as elements are moving from one screen to another. When you use your app, you might think when I click on home and the home page comes up, it just comes up. No, it does not just come up. There is a way it should come up that it will look enticing. There's a transition of ease in or ease out or ease in, ease out that actually goes on behind the scenes that you don't know. When you switch between tabs and the screens are coming up, they shouldn't just come up anyhow. There is a way they should come up that will make it nicer. So structural motion aims to actually solve that for you, whereby it deals with modals, drop downs, two-piece, parallax motion. Naturally, how the structure of an interface is actually created, how everything forms up together is structural motion. And emotional motion is more of creating moments of delight and enticing the users. It's where it's more higher than these two guys, but it's just actually creating a lot of enticement into the product. So for example, most apps have this light and dark mode. You get the concept. If I could just have a normal slide that created and I could just press, switch and this, and it actually happens, but it will be boring. But a situation like this whereby you have, this is actually quite slow. You should be jerking and should be looking nice. But a situation whereby you have this is exciting, is sweet, is memorable. The user will actually remember it and it's looking nicer. You can see there is a jerk at the end. There is an anticipation at the end that makes it all look nicer. So emotional motion creates moments of delight. If you have products that actually implement some things like this, these are the little things that makes it interesting or makes the product very nice. I have a lot of experience using products that actually implement this and it's just so amazing. So more examples of functional motion. You can see situations like this whereby you have, instead of you actually looking for another ways to delete, you actually could just slide and you could actually see straight up like this. And in situations like this, you can see examples that the goal of the animation is to make the functionality of the product way better. In this particular example, the user can rearrange the product as he or she actually desires. The goal of functional motion is just to increase the functionality of the product with the use of animation. You can drag and drop. And when you want to drop it, you actually get like a loading animation actually happening about here. So those are examples about functional motion. For structural motion right now, you can see how the structure of the animation is actually fully explained here in this particular instance. So, for example, looking at this, when you actually slide between tabs, the tab shouldn't just actually show up at once. There should be a smooth movement between the products, between each pages. So structural motion is actually centered around making sure that the structure or the transition between screens is immersive and the screens move easily between each other. It's not just that screens are just moving either and without any structure at all. In examples like this, but structural motion really aims to actually shows the relationship between screens and make the movement of screen really look way more nicer. In emotional design, for example, now, in this particular example, you could see during the identification stage, you could see these little interactions that are actually added when you're entering your details. You can see instead of you just seeing a long list of input fields, you can actually just edit your height from there. And in this particular place, when you want to, this is a drop down and refresh type of animation. So instead of you just drop it down and refreshing and seeing like a loader, when you drop down, you see sort of this animation that actually occurs. You understand? When you see products that actually implement these kinds of animation, it makes the whole experience way more nicer. And also in this particular example also, where you enter your password, there is an illustration that actually comes with it. You get the concept. So when you pass, you actually get to see an happy face and you enter, login successfully, creates a feedback. You understand? Now, emotional motion, you have to be careful about it because if you overdo it, chances are you may end up, painting an unserious, product, a feel of unserious product for yourself. But there's just a way you must know how to actually balance everything together. So emotional motion really, really goes deep down into creating these, illustrations, these interactions, these animated, characters just to make everything look more nicer. So instead of you just having the lame, boring drop down refresh, you could just put and have this wonderful stuff. Instead of having this lame input field, you actually could just have this to actually back it up. So the UI motion anatomy, there are 4 major pillars that support UI animation before you actually can have UI animation. Number 1 is actually the interaction trigger. What causes the animation? Before the animation can start, there must be something that actually triggers the animation. For example, before the animation of that button that I did initially happened, I had to actually hover over the button. So the hovering was actually the interaction. You can actually type to actually cause it. You actually can swipe, you can scroll. Any of this is actually the interaction. Now, the moment the interaction happens, there is a response. What happens when the element has been triggered? Does it move? Does it backflip? Does it decrease opacity? Does it change color? Does it grow? Does it shrink? The response that actually happens after you actually click this interaction is the next. Then we have the timing. Now, how long should the animation or how long should the motion interaction be? And also the delay. How long after the trigger should the animation begins? This timing and also the easing. Easing is more or less the physics of the animation and the smoothness. These two guys are the, how can I put it? Are the foundations of all motion and interaction. Because if your animation is too slow, it will give a different perception to the user. If it's too fast, it will give a different perception. And also easing is actually even very important. If it's coming in fast than coming out, than instead of coming in slower, it actually creates a distortion as it were. So timing and easing are very key important factors that really needs to be known before going to UI animation. Now for timing, the best time to use short durations is when you have, micro interactions like over and click states. And The rule of thumb is actually to use 300 milliseconds anytime you're actually doing something as short as this. You don't want to actually have, let's say when you over a button, it takes like 2 seconds before the interaction comes up. That does not go to make any sense. It gives a sense of lag or a sense of inefficiency in your product. But situations whereby you really need to create, short bursts, like if you want to actually click on a drop down, you want to actually click on the button, you actually want to over a button, you actually want to click a switch, you need short durations. If you have longer hours, it actually might create an issue. Where longer durations will work is when you have screen-to-screen transitions or you have element traversing over large parts of a screen. Or let's say you want to create, a sense of pizzazz or drama or impact. You definitely can go for long durations. I have an example by Charles, friend of mine. In this kind of situation, you see how slow or how long the durations of each of his interactions is. So the goal is that it's actually creating an exotic type of feeling. No, it's a surfing website, you understand? So the interaction is quite, it's quite slow, it's quite majestic. You get to enjoy the full interaction as it were. Get it? So long durations can actually work here, but it's really not advisable to use this perhaps 2 seconds or 3 seconds interval between your transitions when you have very, very long, very, very short tasks to actually accomplish. So the next is actually easing. So I used InVision to fully explain how easing works. Let me just play the preview. So now each of these squares are of the same duration, but they are of different easing. This is more of linear. This is actually more of easing, ease out, and easing, ease out, or spring and elastic. The easing really actually determines how the elements are actually perceived when users are actually going through your animation. So I think one of the major questions that I get from developers is how do you actually hand off your animations to your developers? The off-the-bat explanation, or the off-the-bat option is actually to go through Lottie. So the thing about Lottie is that Lottie helps, or Lottie is actually recommended whereby you have individual animated elements, icons, and interactions. For example, in this situation whereby this particular element is animating, or you have a splash screen whereby this is actually animating, or you have something like this which is actually animating. I know there are some very crazy front-end guys that actually can use CSS animations to actually create this kind of intricate animations, but chances are there may not be bandwidth for that for the average developer, and it actually be quite hard. So the best thing is actually to use Lottie animations. So the designer obviously uploads the designs or the animations to Lottie, and you actually can just grab your Lottie file from there. The other option, which is more complex and tedious, is that you actually inspect. I think InVision gives a way more a detailed feature of actually how you can actually inspect the curves and the velocity of each transition, because majorly animations is just transition curves and speed graphs. Like I was saying initially. So during easing, we have ease in, ease out, we have, spring, we have elasticity and different types of easing. So this really, really determines how the animation is actually perceived. So for example, if a car is starting out from a state of rest, it actually goes from slow to fast. If it's actually coming to a state of rest, it comes from fast to slow. So this easing and this velocity really, really determines how the user will actually see how your animation works. You get the concept. So when you actually apply easing, velocity, and speed graphs, I think we actually have it in Figma. So this is what I was actually saying about easing. There is the easing, the ease out, the easing and ease out, easing back, ease out back, easing and ease out back. And these are actually the curves. So I'm just actually going to create an example of how that works. At least we can create something nice. So let's say we want this rectangle to go like this. We could just let me just use this guy. Prototype, it's this guy. We can actually use Smart Animate. Let us actually try easing. You could actually see the interaction of actually how you actually work. You might not really see the beauty right now, but let me do, you know what, let me just cancel this. But I may not really be able to explain different types of easing simultaneously with Figma. But naturally, there are different types of easing we have. Is the easing, the ease out, the easing and ease out, the easing back, the ease out back, the easing out and ease out back. Now these guys really determine how your animation is actually perceived, how fast it comes in, how slow it goes that, and what's not. This is really key. These are the things that actually makes your animation look much more sweeter. This particular graph ends for actually what is actually exported. I think when you actually work with CSS, there's actually something called the cubic pixel graduation graphs. I think so. These are the graduations that is communicated to the developer, and the developer actually has to create transformation and everything. So, which is actually quite difficult when you actually have an intricate amount of animation to actually create. So, for example, if you were to actually hand this over to the developer will be like, oh, how on earth am I actually going to implement this? So this was actually made on After Effects and exported as actually a Lottie file. So I actually could give this to the developer as a JSON file because Lottie gives you the ability to actually download it as a JSON, or the developer could just go to Handoff and actually get it perhaps from. So when you click on iOS or Android, you actually get like a documentation of how you actually could work. Now, this is the easiest way to actually give your animation to the developer. Yeah, because instead of developer actually having to create this, because I know that there's some guys I've seen on CodePen, they actually create some amazing stuff with CSS and HTML and JavaScript. But you'll be like, how on net is actually this available? Possible, but it's a very difficult thing to do. Obviously, but with Lottie, is more or less plug and play for the developer. You understand? So it's either you actually use Lottie, or if the developer is a bad at, and he actually has to create it, step by step, with the use of understanding the amount of velocity, the curve, and what's not. And lastly, the tools. And majorly, the key tools that are used for motion or UI animation. Now, After Effects obviously is like the tool to roll them all per se. But After Effects has one of a very major flaw. And I think that major flaw is actually in testing and interactivity. So if I actually design in After Effects, if I create some animations now in After Effects, I cannot, place it on the mobile for a user to actually play with and actually fully understand. Compared to tools like Principle or Figma or Invision, whereby I could create nice animations and also could still give it to users to actually test it. Now, this is very important because when you're doing usability testing, it's easier to put it in the hands of your user for them to fully understand it. Yeah, the concept. But apart from that, After Effects is quite powerful. There's practically nothing you can actually make with After Effects. It's just so powerful. Another tool I would say is quite powerful also is actually Principle. Principle is also quite nice, but other notable tools would be Figma and Invision. Now, Figma I place here because Figma is like one of the nicest tools right now, or one of my most favorite tools. Almost all designers are favorite tool right now. Now, the key feature of Invision was, I think, Smart Animate, the ability to fully showcase how two elements actually differ in transformation. But Figma just took the whole feature and placed it as just a single feature in their app with Smart Animate. So almost every single thing you can do with Invision, you also can do it with Figma. The only difference is that perhaps Invision gives you more control with timeline. Another notable tool is Prototype, perhaps Flinto, and Framer. UI animation is very important. It gives a more memorable experience, a more delightful experience in every product. You understand? But because of perhaps the complex nature of it and many parts of the product, development cycle or the product stakeholders not really seeing the benefit at once, perhaps the sales or the marketing. So they put it at the tail end of the design or the tail end of how everything is done. It's not really giving a lot of credence. But any team that actually fully takes control of UI animation, we actually see a much more nicer increase in the use of their product. For example, Apple products right now, they've really, really mastered it, and it has really made their products very, very nicer.
Lekan, how did you get involved with UI animation, and how did you kind of get a taste for it?
Okay, cool. Thank you. So before I actually fully made the transition from graphics design, visual communication design, marketing design, I was also doing animations, my explainer videos and, video animations and everything. So I've had like a background in animations before, in After Effects and what's not. So when I made the switch to product design, it was easier for me, obviously, to make the push. And when I've seen a lot of materials on UI animation, I've seen how cool it actually makes your work look. I was like, wow, I'm actually going to dedicate my time in actually fully learning it. One of the documentations that really changed my animation game was material design. Material design really fully explained transitions, velocities, easings. They call it the choreography of transitions and animation. So when you fully understand this, you will find out that it's not as difficult as you actually think it is. It's just that you don't understand the principles, because Google designers fully broke down how everything should actually goes. So when the screen is coming in, it should ease in. When it's going out, it should ease out. When you have overlapping element, this is how the behavior should be. When you fully understand this, it's just for you to keep applying the same formula again and again. And when people see, they'll be like, wow. So that's majorly my whole history in animation. Understand?
Very nice. Very nice. I've used Principal and Flinto, and those give like a really nice, robust control of animations. But it stinks because you have to import your designs into it. So hopefully Figma gets those fine-tuned controls. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I think with the way Figma is really in a very good form right now, and they are really blazing out, I think they actually could get there. Like I said, the major thing that really made us love Envision was the smart animation feature, whereby within 2 artboards you can create magic. But Figma just made it one of their features. Like you can actually do almost the same thing right now in Figma. So definitely Figma can actually get to the point whereby they will push almost every single person away, whereby you could just start and finish in Figma without going to Principal, Flinto, and the rest of the guys.
I have a question for you, Lekan. This is a really cool presentation. And as someone who's wanting to continue to build up my UI chops and learn how to do these animations, what would you recommend in terms of a thought process or a decision process and figuring out what animations to use when? You just showed us like so many different kinds of animations.
Yeah.
And for someone who's starting, how do you make those decisions?
Very nice, very nice. So one major line of thought I maintain, and I think a lot of designers maintain, is that the goal is not just to show to other designers that you are very good in UI animation. The goal is to ensure that the experience is more memorable, is more intense, and the users really love it. So as such, the animation should be tailored in improving a particular function, should be tailored in improving the flow, should be tailored in improving the goal of the product. So the times I've really enjoyed animation or really enjoyed your animation is when from the start of the product, UI animation has been factored into the design. So when you're starting out the design, you've already created a plan of how the animation is going to be. For example, let's say you have a floating action button that when you click it, it pops up into a modal whereby you actually add a calendar event. So in that kind of situation, if I was to create that kind of screen with UI animation in mind, I will create a sketch whereby the floating action button moves, and from this ellipse, it actually forms up into a rectangle. You understand? So when you click on the floating action button, it moves from the bottom, bottom right, and it goes up to the middle of the screen, and it forms up into the long rectangle whereby you actually have those input feeds. Instead of you clicking on the floating action button, then from nowhere, the screen just comes in, a pop-up just comes in abruptly and just breaks everything. It's not really cool, but when you have like a single uniform movement of how an ellipse just magically forms up into a rectangular model. That really makes it very, very beautiful. Now, these are the little plans and sketches that actually go into the beginning of the design, even before screens have actually been made, even before UI design have actually been made. In that kind of situation, chances are I'm going to ensure that the color of the model matches the color of the floating action button, so that there will be easy transition between both of them. So these are the little plans that goes on even before the design has already begun. But in a situation whereby the designs have been done and we now want to actually create an animation between the floating action button and the corresponding model that comes up. And for example, they have different color codes. And for example, there is no way you can actually make an ellipse. Normally you can make a rectangle into an ellipse by changing the radius, the border radius, and changing the sizes. Is going to automatically make an ellipse. But in a situation whereby there's a disconnection between those two, it will be hard for you to actually create that kind of connection. So it's always difficult for most UI animators to come into the middle of a product whereby the old designs have been made and actually try to create animations between them. It will really be hard, because UI animation, there are some things we call, especially in transitions, there's something we call persistent element, continuous element. There's something we call the transitions that actually continue over time. These are the things that actually make it very interesting. So when you're starting out as a UI animation enthusiast, you must be able to craft your ideas even before you actually start the UI design at first, to be easy for you to actually create memorable experience. You actually have to have a plan of how it's actually going to work. You get the concept here? And one documentation I'm always going to really advise is reading materials design, Google material designs documentation on UI animation. It is just beautiful. They broke it to the very, very, very minutest detail, even handing over to developers. They even created the plugin for handing over to developers from After Effects. So that's as much as possible the advice I can give.
Interesting how designers like some of the things. I know like a lot of devs really don't like Lottie because it's very hard to set up sometimes. So do people just like generally when you hand off design, do they like it or are they like, not Lottie, please?
Okay, the thing about Luffy is that the last team I worked with last year, the first time Lottie was introduced, there were kickbacks initially. So everybody, or the lead front-end guy wanted to go with exporting the animation as GIF. But the GIF was coming out as 10 megabytes, which was insane. I mean, how can you have 10 megabytes worth of animation on just the hero page? It was quite annoying. And Lottie was actually bringing off 5 kilobytes, this better quality, much more impressive. So the moment we had to sit down and say, this can actually work, there's a way we actually could make this work. So the front end sat together and they actually created a way whereby it could actually work. After we've actually broke that particular hurdle, the next time we actually send over animations, they were much more excited to receive it with Lottie, because Lottie just kind of opened their eyes whereby it was easier, it was faster, it was more lightweight. Understand? And funny enough, actually, when I worked with another team again, and I told the developer, look, this is going to be in Lottie. He said he has actually worked with Lottie before. So I think a lot of developers right now are actually really giving into Lottie. There has been a lot of more like an evangelism on Lottie right now by Airbnb and the rest of the guys. I think even Google is really pushing Lottie right now because it just makes sense, because it's more faster, it's more nicer, it's much more easier. So at first, there will be developers that will kick back at it. But if you could fully explain to the developer the importance or the benefits he actually has to gain over GIF or over MP4, and if you could just set up the environment very well at first, it will be very, very important. And I think also it depends on the goal of the design. If it's a product whereby there has to be animations and there have to be interactions, the developer has no choice. Because as a designer, I'm going to pitch to the PM and the client that it is much more efficient to actually have a 5 kilobytes worth of animation than a 10 megabytes worth of animation on the product. So it's less for the developer to actually really do the stuff. Yeah.
Thanks. For those of you that don't know, in like web and stuff, we deal with kilobytes. So 10 megabytes is like truly insane. Like 10 megabytes is like, it takes an hour to download. So it's like unreal.
It's very unreal. Yeah.
In terms of implementing Lottie, I guess is like partially a question for Fisher. Is it just, I assume it's just a package you install. What's the difficulty of using Lottie as a developer?
So that depends on where you want to use it, right? But when you come to React Native and you're running like a slightly off version, so you're like, I don't know, Lottie supports 60.1, but you have 60.2 or you have 59.4, then you're going to have a lot of issues. And it sounds simple. Like sometimes you're just like, oh, upgrade React Native or downgrade React Native. But like React Native is very finicky with that stuff. Like sometimes the visitor management app that we've been working on, there's only a specific version of the QR code generator that works fine, right? So if you just like go up and down React Native versions, it will mess it up. So that there we're like super locked into that React Native version for now. So then like if Lottie doesn't work with that or it's colliding with something else, then you have a huge issue. It's just a little cumbersome to set up. Yeah, if you're running it in an environment where you can just easily like npm install Lottie, you'll be fine.
Got it. Yeah, so just kind of, it's a little bit of a fragile package, but there's not like a bunch you have to do to make it work. I was just curious what made it hard.
Yeah, but if you pick any 10 React Native projects, 9 of them are going to have a specific version they have to be at. So that's when you run into issues. If like either you want a feature from Lottie that's not available in the version that's available for your React Native, or there's just not a Lottie version that's not bugged, and then you have to go in and monkey patch it and do all this weird stuff. So yeah, it can be cumbersome, but if you plan on using Lottie from the get-go, you're like, okay, I'm making a new project, I want to use Lottie, then you kind of adjust it to Lottie and kind of cherry pick everything else.
Got it.
But yeah.
Very cool. Thank you, sir. This was awesome. That's it, guys.
Just amazing. You're gonna be my animator from now on.
Thank you for putting examples. I think that was really cool. I mean, at least me that as a newbie, that was really cool to see the different examples and like the timing and everything. Very cool.
Hi.
Thanks, Lekan.
No, it's fine. Thank you so much.